Afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Milmo, the Global Technology Editor of The Guardian newspaper. And it's an honor to be here to be at this event, to be with this fantastic panel, who I'll introduce shortly, but also to debate what, for me, is an issue of the age, not just in tech, but generally. I'm sure you've read all the headlines, you've read all the comments about artificial intelligence and the need to regulate it. I know we're talking about a decades-old technology, but things have changed and changed quite sharply over the past year. And I think there's two important words in the title of this talk, and that is Pandora's box. And there very much is a sense from me, and I don't know, amongst you all, talking to your friends, colleagues, decision makers around the industry, that Pandora's box has been opened over the past year. I think we all know that the sort of seismic and symbolic event for the general public and for politicians was the emergence of that latest iteration of ChatGPT last year and in March, and how that has coincided with an arms race. And I don't think that's a hyperbolic word that's been used by a lot of senior people in the tech industry to describe what's happened with AI. That's an arms race in terms of spending. Colossal amounts of commercial investment in AI now happening. You know, this has flipped. 10 years ago, the academic world was sort of leading the way in AI development in many ways. Now it's very firmly the commercial sector. And also this arms race in terms of compute, the sheer power needed to create the models that we're all fascinated by, that too has increased massively and led us to this situation where politicians and the companies themselves know that AI now needs to be regulated, not relegated. That's not going to happen. And that's two concerns. There's the immediate concern, which is simplistic stuff like we're talking about generative AI here. Disinformation. We've got one very big election next year, that's the US presidential election, and we potentially got a UK general election next year, although that could be deferred to January 2025. Unlikely. We'll probably get two big elections next year, where we've already heard a lot of concerned voices about the ability for generative AI to mass produce, at scale, nuanced disinformation. And then we've got the longer term issue, which Ian Hogarth, the head of the AI task force, the UK government task force, has referred to, as have many speakers at the event this week, like Stuart Russell at Berkeley, another great British AI commentator. And that is the development of super intelligent AI that is beyond human control. I think that's a legitimate concern. We're probably not going to talk about that as much today, but nonetheless, I think you can see the gamut of concerns and the challenge that lawmakers face in terms of regulating AI now. But there's an optimistic take on this. There are signs of AI regulation emerging already, and I'll just do a quick précis of these, which our panel's going to do more fully. Number one, we've got the Global AI Safety Summit in November the 1st and 2nd. There's going to be a big and important turnout of company and global leaders. It's going to be a big political as well as commercial event. That's going to be a big deal, and things are going to come from that. We've got obviously the European Union AI Act, which is probably the first out of the gate in terms of regulation. Not yet law, but is some way down the track. The US, the White House has secured commitments, voluntary commitments to AI safety from all the major tech firms and the AI firms. They're one and the same in many ways, so Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI. And it's also produced an outline bill of rights for AI. And then lastly, and very much not least, China produced its own set of AI regulations last month, which are very detailed and pretty stringent, as stringent as anything that we're seeing out there at the moment. Anyway, that's enough about me. So, our panel. It's great that we are joined by a real broad range of knowledge here and insight today. What I'm going to do is try and keep this broad. What is the situation of regulation now? What should we expect from the Global AI Safety Summit? And what is going to happen if we just accept the status quo? What are we going to be looking at in terms of the regulation of AI in 5 years' time? So it's sort of three broad sets of questions, because I want to just sort of, I think it's a complex question. I want to keep us all abreast of just where we are right now and the different things to keep an eye on. Anyway, right, so to discuss this, I'm joined by Didi Denham, who is the head of AI policy at Google in the UK. I'm joined by Karen Silverman, who is the CEO and founder of the Cantellus Group, a tech advisory firm, and is also an AI advisor and innovator with the World Economic Forum, brackets, the people who run Davos, close brackets, and Irakli Beridze, who is the head of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at the UN. fantastic panel, much to cover. So what I wanted to start off with first, Didi, and the panel, is the current state of AI governance in the UK and globally. Is it fit for purpose in terms of the challenges ahead? Didi, if you can give us sort of an oversight of where we are in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we've long said at Google that AI is too important not to regulate and too important not to regulate well. And we've seen, a lot of action this year. And it's tempting to look for a kind of silver bullet solution. But AI raises really complex questions that require, nuanced answers from a whole range of actors. So I'll come on to the UK, but if I start with industry as the first layer, I think it's important that industry comes together in forums to, develop and identify best practices and technical standards. And we've seen development there. Google has come together with the other leading AI labs to create the Frontier Model Forum just a few weeks ago. And that aims to, test AI responsibly, identify best practices, and share information. So I think that's one important layer. The second is obviously at the national level. So I think we kind of support a hub and spoke model where regulators are empowered to issue guidance in their kind of sectors and domains, and then supported by a central coordinating function. And the UK approach that they outlined in their white paper is a really good example of that. So that's focused on the context in which AI is deployed. It's rooted in clear principles, and it means the regulators are able to use their existing expertise. Yeah,
so it's existing institutions, basically. So the UK's proposed approach at the moment is that we've got a lot of the right things in place.
Yeah, and I think this approach will complement existing legislation that applies already, like data protection law.
Yeah.
And the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, which is known as the DRCF, which brings together it brings together the 4 UK regulators with responsibility for digital regulation. They've noted that actually the regulators, are empowered now to take action. So I think.
And just as a quick note, in terms of Google, over the past 20 years, we've obviously seen these emergence of these incredible powers in tech, Google, Facebook, etc. There is, as you know, plenty of commentary that legislators, lawmakers have been too late to their perceived dominance. I'm sure you'd argue against any claim that Google are too dominant, etc. But can you understand why there is a call now, as we enter this new phase of AI, for government legislation to come in now, immediately, for there to be faster action than there was before in terms of data privacy that we had with social media and search?
Yeah, and I think that's why we've called for AI regulation since 2018. So we acknowledge it's important, because that's how you realize the benefits and the opportunity too, while kind of ensuring trust and that it's deployed responsibly. And I think that's one of the advantages of the UK approach, is that it can be implemented quickly.
Sure. Okay. And just in terms of that voluntary approach, as you mentioned, the task force, the Frontier Forum.
Frontier Model Forum.
Frontier Model
Forum.
Lots
of acronyms.
There is a lot of voluntary. We have seen a lot of voluntary statements and initiatives from tech firms over the past 6 months. I mean, frankly, a bit of a blizzard, really. I mean, there's also the White House voluntary commitments.
Yeah.
So there's actually quite a lot of work being done on that front already. And obviously we'll come to coalescing around something more formal. But it does feel there's a lot of work being done.
I think there's action across industry, national governments, and internationally. And I think that's important. It needs all those stakeholders involved.
Okay. And Karen, thank you. So where are we in terms of AI governance right now? Has progress been made? Are we in a good place? Is everyone across it? I mean, as in lawmakers, companies, do they know what they're looking at? Do they know what they're trying to regulate?
Sort of yes, sort of no. For all the reasons that Didi's laid out, I think there's been a lot of attention and focus that's leading to some action, some meaningful action. Are we there yet? Not nearly. Do we really even know where we're trying to go? Not completely. And I think that's one of the issues right now, is at least in the US, I would say it's the proposed regulatory initiatives as opposed to anything sort of solidly on a track. But the proposals are all over the place, and they're regulating all kinds of different things. Some of them are trying to regulate technologies, some of them use cases, some of them the specific actors or acts. And so it's just very uneven terrain, even within the U.S. You add to that the international approaches, some of which are prudential, some of which are trying to be a little more muscular. But the core issue, I think, for a lot of entities that aren't the platform tech companies, is that they've got to do this governance internally, sort of regardless of what the regs call for, right? And so there's this parallel initiative going on to understand what it means to control these technologies in your business, in your school, in your home. And that's running alongside, and I think it's starting to, I don't know if it's starting to contribute to the conversation, but it's starting to open up a new channel of sort of mainstream understanding of what governance, why it's complicated and why it's really hard to do the ways we've always done it. And I think the attention that is sort of interesting to me is we talk a lot about innovation and technology, and for all the right reasons. We're going to have to start innovating our institutions, innovating how we regulate, like to just think of new ways to do this. And that's where I think we're just starting that conversation, because people are coming finally to the conclusion that the old ways of doing things are not particularly well suited or to your point, fit for purpose.
Yeah, I mean, there's interesting questions that pop up with me in terms of, I talk to lawyers a lot about AI, because in terms of regulating AI, it has to happen now, and obviously what you fall back on in the UK is common law, various acts of parliament, etc. So you end up talking to lawyers quite a lot, but there's simple questions like, if a large language model ends up producing this information, who's responsible for it?
There are all sorts of legal questions about liability and responsibility, about jurisdiction, about remedies. Like, how do you fix a problem like that? And so there's, again, we have to think sort of afresh about what we're trying to do, what outcomes we want, and what we've learned about how to get those sorts of places. But we're not there's not a map to follow. That somebody's just not picked up, if that makes sense.
Okay, can I just ask you, just to help the audience, because you're an expert in all of this, but if I can ask specifically in terms of the United States, there has been a lot of action out of the United States over the past few months. Only yesterday, we had, only this week, we've had appearances by the big tech execs, Microsoft, Elon Musk, etc., in Washington. Can you talk us through some of the regulatory announcements that have come out of the US and how binding they are, starting with the White House commitments, and then
very little that's binding. The things that are binding are the New York law around human resources tools, decision support tools. There are a couple, the Illinois biometrics law, some of the California privacy and AI law, rules. Binding, the FTC is enforcing their unfair and deceptive trade practices law, which is a law.
That's the consumer regulator, the FTC.
And antitrust, so it's sort of an interesting oversight. Okay. What's interesting about the Bill of Rights coming out of the White House is it's sort of in three parts. The first part is the one and only statement that's really in the voice of the citizen. It's the only thing. Everything else is aimed at the developers or at what they're calling deployers, which is a terrible way to refer to people who use a tool. But they're not really aimed at the citizens, which I know is what Irakli is focused on. And so it is interesting just for the fact that set of statements is out there. Now the other 2/3 of it are more traditional in that sense. But there's a lot of guidance. I think there's an effort to create kind of a normative landscape, an effort to create a set of expectations, and also just to socialize the sorts of issues that are likely to come up when you use these tools and these techniques. And that necessarily is dynamic because there's so much new capability coming on.
Yeah. And obviously the US matters because all the big AI.
Yeah, but taking a very sectoral approach. There's a sort of a thematic coordination effort going on at the White House, and then the components of a federal government are each sort of doing their own work. The states are each doing their own work, and there are some cities who have decided to do their own work. So to understand the full landscape, it's another panel.
We need another session. Irakli, so the United Nations, when everyone thinks of global governance or something, when I do, I think of the United Nations. Can you talk us through the UN's work on AI and the initiatives and whether there's a chance of a framework emerging that everyone will adhere to?
Yes, thank you, Dan. Thank you for this question. Well, United Nations has been involved now with the area of artificial intelligence for quite a while. Since 2015, we've been discovering each different agency actually of the UN within their mandate how, on the one hand, the AI can bring benefits, and at the same time, how risks associated to AI could be avoided, could be mitigated. At the same time, we have two sort of a parallel. Parallel streams of work happening at the UN. One is on the policy side, so there are numerous policy initiatives there. There are even governance instruments, AI governance instruments issued and proposed. And at the same time, there are a lot of practical work of AI as well. For example, at the UN, we have AI for Good Summit, where we examine how AI technology can contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, moving on from back to 2015, 17, and later on, now with the sort of exponential growth of the technology like artificial intelligence, and everybody sees the huge potential of that, and at the same time, huge dangers of that, we at the UN and member states, as well as the Secretariat, feel that, okay, there is a really urgent need of proposing different governance models and see how it could be governed on the sort of a global side. One of the recent developments is the proposal of creation of the high-level advisory body, which will be created just now. At the same time, at the UN, we have an interagency working group on artificial intelligence, which consists of all different UN agencies, and I'm part of that group as well. And these two groups will be working hand in hand to come up with governance sort of models which would be proposed to the member states. And it's quite an ambitious task to do that by end of this year, actually. So we see how this is going to work out. But I think that we will have a lot of work ahead of us. And I can comment on this later as well, but international policy making is a very complex undertaking, obviously, and especially to govern something which is changing exponentially, it's a huge task, and to do that on an international arena with 193 UN member states signing up to that. So we have quite a challenging task, and I sometimes do say that this is one of the biggest challenges our generation needs to solve or will face, but at the same time, this is something that needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, one sort of reference to the UN that you catch quite a lot in terms of interviews with Elon Musk and Sundar Pichai at Google is a reference to a sort of UN nuclear proliferation style agreement on AI. Do you think that's possible? Should people compare the two things? One is in existence, UN Proliferation Treaty, the other an idea that there's a sort of AI equivalent of it. Do you think that's possible?
Well, look, I mean, there are many different instruments, there are many different treaties, and there is nothing which would just fit directly to the AI. I do believe that if we ever have to have a sort of a global charter, which we would need to have it needs to be complex, and there has to be several sort of aspects answered there. On the one hand, there has to be incentive for everybody to participate in that, so wider world. That everybody would be able to benefit from the technology. So whatever charter will be there, it has to have an incentive for everyone to participate, and it has to have a sort of a benefits for countries who may not even have the technology as well. At the same time, to avoid and to mitigate the risks, that charter needs to have some kind of a verification mechanism attached to it, so to ensure that everybody's complying to that, because otherwise there are treaties which don't have this verification mechanism, and then there is no way of checking whether it works or not. So you do need to have that. So incentives, verification mechanism, and very complex sort of a treaty which most of the countries would be happy to participate, and that's a very challenging task to actually achieve.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the Global AI Safety Summit on November the 1st and November the 2nd in Bletchley Park, hosted by Rishi Sunak. From what I understand, all the countries that have been invited are treating it very seriously, as are all the companies. You know, it's going to be a big event, an important event. So you know, it's going to be a pivotal one in terms of the subject of this discussion. So Didi and the panel, we'll start with you first, Didi. What should this summit aim to achieve, you know, realistically and optimistically? And what do you think it is likely to achieve? Yeah, the more pragmatic response to it. So ideally, what should it achieve?
Yeah.
Realistically, what is it going to achieve?
Yeah, well, I think just to say, you know, it's great to see the UK leadership in this space. I think international cooperation is key. You know, AI is a kind of world-changing, cross-cutting technology, so we really need this international alignment, and I think it's a good opportunity for the UK to take that leadership. And I think, as well as obviously focusing on aligning around, you know, common principles and best practices, which is an important opportunity for the summit, and thinking about, you know, some of the risks at the frontier of the technology, which it says it will do. I think it's also important to make sure it's focused on the kind of opportunity as well, and the opportunity that AI will have to tackle, you know, international challenges that we're facing, like climate change or global health and education. And it will do that by ensuring we're kind of aligned around those norms and frameworks.
Do you feel it's got a slightly negative framing at the moment in terms of this is about risk rather than opportunity? That's sort of sense I pick up from talking to people about it. I don't know how the audience feels about it.
Well, I think there's a balance, and I think they've acknowledged that obviously it's important to talk about the risks and challenges and the safety aspect, but I think they're going to incorporate hopefully the opportunity too. So.
Okay, great. Karen.
Clearly above my pay grade. But what I would say is that it's important that that the nations that are leaning in are leaning in. I think it's important to get a roadmap for how we're not to try to do all the things at once, but to sort of have some kind of a systematic, visible roadmap against which industry can work, you know, wherever they may find themselves, or for that matter, other governments can work. On the issues, I think demonstrating and trying to bring some clarity to how, you know, we often read in the media, we were presented with a lot of false choices, that you get governance or you get innovation, right? And that these are somehow opposing forces, and they've never been. And we need it's not binary, and it's one of a bunch of false choices that I think are not helping to advance meaningful conversation. And I think that one in particular, to the extent that we can get clarity around how the governance and regulations that we're talking about are going to unlock innovation at all up and down the stack, would be actually very helpful at this stage. And then I think we've got to tackle disinformation, because it's a clear and present danger, and it's probably more about people than it is about the technology. But it's the thing people are going to feel first.
Do you mean illegal people in terms of the purpose?
Well, it's the technology. It's the technology. It's been around. It's what people are doing with it, and the extent to which we can identify it and frankly manage ourselves in and around it. And I think that is as much a people problem as it is a technology problem, and it would be incomplete to try to treat that just as a technology issue.
Okay, because just in terms of disinformation, if I recall, the major AI players, the US players, have committed to watermarking AI-generated content. That doesn't address the issue.
It starts to address the issue. It addresses part of the issue, but the real issue is that people are generating it, promoting it, profiting off of it, making chaos agents around it. Like that's a people thing. On the inbound, I think it's going to be very. I think there's going to be a cognitive load associated with having to navigate day in and day out what is what is reliable information and what is not. And we're not doing much to manage how people are going to do that in the workforce or at home, or in schools we talk about plagiarism, and that's a sort of a shadow of this problem. But anyway, we've got and then we have the sort of the politically destabilizing part of it too. But I just think that is the most imminent problem we're going to face, quite honestly, that is a byproduct of these capabilities. And I'd like to see some attention, some balanced attention brought to that. But again, no one's asked me to draft the agenda.
Sure. So. Okay. Irakli, Global AI Safety Summit. I mean, obviously, again, with that UN hat on, do you think it's possible that it can produce a global framework on November the 2nd that will sort of set a path forward? Or more realistically, are we just going to sort of see sort of steps laid out towards getting towards that consensus?
Thank you, Dan. Now, look, it's the first time that we are going to have a summit dedicated to AI on such a high political level.
Yeah.
And as a minimum, what it is going to achieve is that it's going to raise a global awareness that this issue is very serious and it requires serious approaches from the highest possible political attention from everybody in the world. Look, we have 60 or 70 countries now who adopted their national AI strategies, digital strategies to it, which is a good thing. Countries starting from 2018 started to have government...
So is that a UN document, the national...
Sorry?
So what have they adopted? Sorry.
These are national strategies, basically.
Right, sorry, yeah.
AI national strategies. Countries are adopting that. Now, it is really good that 60, 70 countries have that, but at the same time, two-thirds of the world don't have any of these strategies.
Yeah.
What it means is that most of the countries still have not invested or have not sort of prepared ground to invest in that, whether it's financially, intellectually, or so on and so forth.
Are there some big countries missing on that list, by the way?
So we have a lot of countries. I mean, we have 193 UN member states, and if 70 countries have it, I mean, you do the math. I mean, there is quite a lot, more than 100 countries don't have the strategies.
And obviously, given open source AI, freely available, freely adjustable AI code, essentially, keep it very simple, that makes it a very democratic phenomenon. And so countries that don't have AI guidelines could find themselves being centers of abuse of that.
That's correct. Obviously, I mean, with the open source, countries can access to some of it, but if countries did not sort of did not take commitments to this issue, did not adopt strategies, what it means is that they have not sort of taken this issue that seriously. And the summits like that would bring the global attention that everybody should participate, because otherwise the main danger would be that right now we're already experiencing this quite a dangerous global digital divide where these 60, 70 countries are heavily investing in this technology, and they're going to achieve a lot of results to that, which is wonderful, obviously, from technological point of view, also on the policy side. But then if a big portion of the world will stay behind, we may have a serious problems of including unemployment, including sort of taking the jobs away and shifting there. And look, right now we have almost half of the world who don't have a proper access to the internet. And coupled with this sort of a lack of awareness or lack of sort of adoption of the strategies, we might actually end up living in a very uneven world in the future if nothing is done. And I do believe that that type of undertakings, which will be happening soon, as a minimum, is going to sort of raise that bar and make that issue extremely sort of serious on the global stage as well.
Okay, and sorry, just if this will help the audience, just want to ask the three of you very quickly, are there any extant AI regulatory frameworks, commitments, statements of principle out there at a government level or indeed at an industry level that the audience should look at in terms of, if they're interested in the subject, how a framework from the Global AI Safety Summit might look? Sorry to put you on the spot. I hadn't mentioned this backstage, but is there any, Didi, is there any anything that a good guiding point to where we might end up on November the 2nd, like a list of?
Well, I think the voluntary commitments that we made with the White House are a good basis.
Which are online.
Yes, which are online. And they focus on commitments around safety, security, and trust. And I think that could form a good basis for the summit.
Karen?
Yeah, I would say that, there's a bazillion statements of principle out there. So that's not the hard part. The hard part is figuring out what you're going to do with them and getting them implemented in a way that is fit for purpose for a particular organization. But in terms of the broad stroke, I would say that that's really interesting. You could look at all the stuff coming out of, like NIST for the risk management frameworks, things like that, which are also very reminiscent of other frameworks we have running around. The World Economic Forum, I will say, has some really good materials if you're just looking to get grounded. A little more off-Broadway, but I think is very good, are the Business Roundtable Responsible AI Initiative in the US is quite agile and as interesting both on the policy side and on the principle side. OECD for sure, and UNESCO. I mean, like there's some really wonderful kind of treatments out there, I think.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, there are a lot of sort of different models and different governance models around, which, we need to sort of examine it and try out some of them. For example, our center, the center which I am heading, together with Interpol, just recently, a couple of months ago, we launched a specialized governance instrument, which is called a toolkit for the responsible use of AI by law enforcement. And AI's application in the law enforcement, as you can agree, is one of the most sensitive sort of part of the application of AI, but at the same time, every law enforcement agency I've spoken to or worked with either is using AI or will be using AI in the future, and we do need governance structures for that particular field as well. So what we did is that it was quite a sort of a lengthy work with the multi-stakeholder involvement and contribution of all stakeholders, including public. And last June, we issued a governance instrument, which is quite a large document, 150 pages to that, which helps and in the future will help the law enforcement agencies to use this technology to solve problems on the crime-related problems on the one side, but at the same to do it in a responsible and human rights compliant manner. And in the years to come, together with Interpol and with support of the European Commission, we are going to actually help countries to implement that governance instrument in the ground nationally and translate it into their standard operational procedures as well. So it's one of the instruments. I'm not saying that this is sort of could be an example of that, but those are one among many which can actually work.
Okay, great. We're sort of running out of time slightly. So just the final part of this sort of triumvirate of questioning is what are the likely consequences of nothing happening, i.e. winding all the way back to question one, we're just at a state where there's sort of attempts to make agreement, but they aren't reached. There's no meaningful global agreement. There's patchwork pieces of legislation with differing approaches around the world. As I said, UK, EU, US, China. In 5 years' time, what does that world look like, and will we be in a lot of trouble if nothing changes from here?
So I think to go back to my answer to the first question, it's important that we regulate AI well, and I think we've heard today that there are numerous initiatives ongoing, and there's a real acceleration of cooperation and coordination, which is important, and will help us realize the benefits while minimizing the downsides. And so if I slightly reframe the question and think in 5 years' time, what could we have gotten right, or how do we realize those benefits? And I think it's that multi-layered governance, it's input from many people, governments, civil society, academia, and using that to make sure we have kind of good governance frameworks in place so that we have the innovation, but we also have the trust.
Great. Karen.
Yeah, and I think everything Didi said, I think it's really important for us to just also always remember to frame this as this is a journey, not a destination, right? That we're not going to be somewhere in 5 years. I mean, we'll be somewhere in 5 years, but it's not. We're not going to achieve responsible AI or governance or things like that. This is going to be an ongoing practice, and so we're going to. I think we'll be better at it than we are now. We'll know more. We'll know what matters. We'll know how many different versions of governance are going to be, acceptable or workable. There's not going to be one size fits all, and we should understand that.
And so it will be multi-layered.
It's got to be multi-layered, and even at the same layers, it's got to be flexible because just like. Universities look the same on the surface, but when you get underneath, they're very different places, or families, or corporations, and so they need some flexibility to make it real for them. And that's going to vary by industry, by resources, by geography. And so that diversity is not bad if we're all engaged in good faith and making progress on that journey. And I'm optimistic about that. And there really aren't, when you look around, there aren't that many institutions that we value that have no governance associated with them, right? And so we've just got to sort of figure out the language, who's going to participate, and what we're going to expect of our progress, which is why I go back to a roadmap, not a rigid one, but a directional roadmap, I think could be useful to the broader community sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so what we need to have out of this year over the crucial few months ahead is that sense of where we should be heading towards, and then let the multi-layered approach take care of that, the institutions.
And I think we'll be a lot happier then with the innovations that we come up with as a result of that.
Okay, Irakli.
Right. Thanks. I fully agree. I mean, this is a journey, and there will be a lot of things happening actually in 3 to 5 years or 10 years time. If you think about it, 5 years ago, nobody could have imagined that we would have generative AI technology so much sort of persistent right now, and a lot of people would be using it and getting a lot of results out of that. That was kind of unimaginable back then, and now it's there, and the UN Secretary General talks about these technologies, and government summits are held in that regard. So a lot of progress will be made in the future as well. Technology itself will progress exponentially, certainly, and we will have a lot of positive solutions coming up from the technology as well. I sometimes say that we will solve problems which we've never thought were possible to be solved, and this is wonderful. When I observe solutions present at the UN's AI for Good Summit, it gives a lot of hope that we do have actually a possibility to contribute to the solutions of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example, and achieve that, and actually go beyond and do it. But at the same time, obviously, we'll have a lot of challenges, starting from the employment side, starting from the governance side, starting from even things like criminal use of AI. I mean, we've seen how deepfake technology becomes so sophisticated that it's going to dominate most of the even sort of political processes, including elections and so on and so forth. So there will be many different type of things which we would need to deal with, at the same time mitigate all of the risks, govern the technology properly, and extract the benefits out of it, because there will be a lot of benefits too.
Yeah, sorry, the economic impact of AI, massively important. We haven't even broached that, my fault, but we have so much to cover, and nonetheless, that was absolutely fascinating précis of the situation that we face. So thank you very much to Didi, Karen, and Irakli. That was brilliant. I think Pandora's box is very much still open, but I've got a clear idea, just speaking for myself, about where this issue is going to go over the next few years and what's going to happen over the next few months, and indeed what the different territories you're talking about are doing to deal with it. So thank you very much, and thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you.